In part 2 of managing Linux user and groups, we'll look at going to the command line and actually creating some user accounts. We'll take a peek at the useradd command that actually allows us to create the accounts, and allows us to do a lot more. We'll look at userdel, which allows us to remove accounts if necessary. And we'll also take a peek at the password utility, but more than just the particular utility itself, we'll be looking at the files that make up user authentication on a local system. Primarily, we'll be interested in /etc password and /etc shadow. Both those files, we'll investigate them. And then we'll look at creating user accounts in a GUI utility. And finally, we'll look at the user mod command that allows us to modify existing user accounts. All right, let's get going. So the first thing we'll do is actually create an account with the useradd command. But before we create it, I want to show you some of the options you have. So if we type useradd --help, we have a bunch of different options we can set here. Some of them I will use to demonstrate what they do. You can basically set the user ID, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. You can also set the group. You can set what shell they'll have by default. You can set password also from here. You do have to encrypt that before you actually set it. You can say where the home directory will be, and you can create that home directory. So the M will create the home directory, and D up here will actually specify where it is. We can leave comments in here, and all the information that we're putting in here when we create this user at the command line is actually going into the etc password file. We can also specify, the groups that this user is a member of. So let's get out of here. And the first thing I want to show you is the defaults that will be specified when we create a user. So by default, there are some parameters that are already going to be set for us. And if I use the capital D option with useradd and press enter, I get to see some of this information. So I look at it over here, and I can see where the home directory will be set. I can see that if the password expires, the user will still be able to log in. It will not disable the account, basically what's going on here. We can set any kind of expiration if this is maybe a temporary account. Shell information. This is interesting. This is the shell directory. So if I want the user to have something after they log in, I can put it in the shell directory, and then when the user is created and they log in, they'll see it there, which is really nice. So let's go out of here. And what I'll do now is create a user account using some of the parameters that we have there. So I'll do a useradd, and what I'll do is put a comment in here, and comments typically would hold information about the user's name. So we'll just say it's Joe Smith. And then after that, I'm going to change the shell just to show you that we can. So this user wants to use the corn shell instead of the default bash shell. So I'm overriding what is in that default file. And then after that, I just have to specify the login name. So J Smith, right? Good login name for this particular user. Now when I press enter here, I want to show you a couple things that happen. First of all, let me just talk about the ID. When I press ID and I'm logged in as root, because only root can accomplish these tasks, you can see that my ID is 0. Remember, it's a computer. All it cares about is numbers. It does not care about names. So root is the first user account and ID 0. Joe Smith, on the other hand, if I say ID J Smith, the account I just created, it's going to come back and give me information about the user ID and the group ID of that particular user account I've just created. And that's how the system will track that user. And you can also see what groups Joe is a member of. And as you can tell, Joe's only a member of his own group. By default, users, when created in many Linux distributions, are put into a private user group. Not all distributions do this, but many do. And therefore, they're the only member of that group and nobody else is. If I want to add them to another group, I have to modify their group status. What I want to show you next is, actually I'll cd into the etc directory and show you this. What we'll look at is the etc password file. And here are where traditionally passwords and account information was kept. And if you look up here, the first one you see is root, and we'll just look at what's going on there. So first we have the name. Where this X is basically where the password traditionally would have been held. It's no longer saved in this file. It's actually saved in a file called shadow, and it's encrypted in that file. And the reason that is because everybody has access to read this particular file, but only root can read the shadow file. So your passwords are well protected. Then I have the ID and group ID. I have who this is. This is a commenter. This is root. And root's home directory, and then what shell root will use. The rest of these that you see, you'll see some of these that say sbin no login. Basically what that is a service on the system, and that service has no login shell, no shell, so it cannot log in interactively, and that's good because we don't want somebody, logging in as the mail service, right, and trying to get into our account that way. So no login just specifies that that particular account cannot log in interactively, but it does need an account on the system to work correctly. I'm going to press Shift-Control-G, go down the bottom of the file, and you'll see two accounts that I have created here. Now, all those other accounts up there were, created by the system, except, even root. I created student and J. Smith, and you can see the information down here about this. So same thing about Joe Smith. You'll notice that student doesn't have a comment, but Joe Smith does. And Joe Smith is using the corn shell. Now, I don't want Joe Smith to use the corn shell, so you know what I can do? I could actually VI this file, or edit this file, go down to the bottom of the file, go here, and I'm going to switch that because, we're going to say that was a mistake. And we want him to use the bash file, just like everybody else on the system. Now, Joe has not logged in yet, and you can tell that Joe has not logged in yet if we go over to, unless the shadow file. This is the file that passwords are encrypted in and also holds information about account expiration. If I go down here, you'll notice right here after bin, these are those accounts that had the no login. Well, you see the asterisk? That's basically saying there's no password set on this, and therefore these accounts cannot log in directly to the system. Root has this long hash up here that represents the password. Let's go down to the bottom and take a look here. Shift-G, get down to the bottom. Student, which we've logged in before with, has a long hash mark 2, which represents the password. But notice up here, the exclamation. That's what actually says that there's no password set on this particular account. So there's no password set here. And this user cannot log in until a password is set. So for this user to actually log in to the system, root has to set the initial password for him. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and look at how that's changed. So I will run as root the password utility, and I will password Joe Smith, and it'll ask for a password. I'll give it a lousy one. It doesn't like it, but it'll take it because it's root. And then I will less shadow again, go down to the bottom, and sure enough, look what's happened to Joe's account. Now we have the encrypted password, even that, and believe it or not, that actually is the word work. 4 letters. The information you see over here really deals with the account expiring, when the password was changed, how can the user change the password, how long is it going to be before they have to change the password, which is this part right here, which is kind of interesting right off the bat. It's almost 100,000 days. So by default, the system is pretty liberal about allowing you to change your password, which you can do anytime, and how long you can keep your password, which is, a couple of 100 years, and then a warning after a couple of 100 years if you have to change your password. It'll give you a 7-day warning to let you know that you need to do that. All right, so let's get out of here. And what I'll do is flip over to another screen now, and I'll log in as J Smith. Alright, and I'll type pwd, and we can see that J Smith has a home directory once again created. Now, anything in here, if I want something, you notice there's not a lot in here right now. Just some basic hidden files. If I want anything else in here, I have to actually put it in the etc directory. And I'll show you that along with usermod and userdel in the next video.